The Hudson River Maritime Museum is the only museum in New York State exclusively dedicated to preserving the maritime history of the Hudson River.
And the history of its tributaries, but not only that, the history of an industry that once dominated the Hudson Valley.
Steamboats, tugboats, the industries that traveled by water. Yeah, we are the only one.
The museum is located on the historic Rondout waterfront at Kingston, which was once a major port between New York City and Albany.
But we also had the Delaware and Hudson Canal, which brought coal from Pennsylvania to the Rondout Creek here at Kingston through the whole 19th century, which was a major engine of economic success for the community because coal was the fuel of the steam age in the 19th century. So this was a very bustling port.
Most of the museum pieces reflect the 19th and 20th centuries.
Shipbuilding during World War II, which was major in the Hudson Valley.
Providing a showcase of the importance of the river during the Industrial Revolution.
The basic destination for the cargoes was New York City. They used to have to take the trains across by ferry sometimes, and they did a lot of it in New York Harbor, but some on the Hudson River too. Bricks began to be produced by the millions when New York City started growing and they wanted to have fireproof building materials, and that all traveled by water. It was the cheapest way to ship.
The collection is housed both indoors and outdoors and is comprised of paintings, prints, photographs, blueprints, artifacts, ship models, and models of Hudson River vessels that have long since disappeared.
He's backing up. It's going to be
yes,
really
it's loud.
Visitors also have the opportunity to look at vessels tied up in the yard and watch the boat traffic on the Rondout Creek.
This was a big towing port. There was a company here, Cornell Steamboat Company, that was the major towing company on the river. So it's very fitting that we have an actual steam tug in our yard.
It doesn't have that same perspective when it's in the water.
They don't look big, and the distance too. When you see a tugboat, it's at a distance. Seeing these tugboats and steamboats and stuff was over by 1980, and so that's why the museum got started.
One can see a lifeboat and bell from the steamboat Mary Powell.
And even though this was the most famous and beloved boat of its time, it got scrapped like everything else. So that's just what they did. You know, that's just how it worked.
Can't save everything, right?
No.
Deck fittings and other equipment from scrap tugs and steamboats.
What this wall that it's on is a piece of an old steamboat. The faces are over old porthole openings, so it's very authentic.
I do appreciate that this one has a giant mustache.
Yeah, well, that's what they had in the old days. They dressed up and the men had mustaches. And it was a classic era and a pretty much prosperous era too, and a very different era than we see today. All that stuff is gone, so we're trying to not just preserve that, but to let people know what it was like.
Today the waterfront looks quite different, but being on the waterfront inspires the notion that the river itself is part of the museum and an exhibit in its own right.
It's great. The access for the public is so important because there's not that much of it, you know? Yeah. So people have an idea that it wasn't always the way it is now, that there was a lot going on here 100 years ago that you can't even imagine.
Everybody loves the water.
They do. It's amazing. And since the river got cleaned up, that's made a big difference, I think.
Oh, yeah.